In 1980, American football landed in Italy officially, and since that time, the Italian Federation of American Football has fielded multiple leagues featuring more than 10,000 male and female athletes on about 100 teams playing tackle and flag football. This year, on 4th of July weekend, for the first time ever, the Italian Bowl will be held in America, the first one outside Italy, the 42nd Italian Bowl. And with us today is Nick Eyde, who's promoting this really once in a lifetime, or maybe more than once in a lifetime event. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
This has raised some eyebrows, especially at a time when Azzurri football is kind of at a transitional stage, let's say. So what is it about American football that's kind of taken Italy's interest, and why is the league bringing its championship to America?
I think it's part of what I've always called, after playing so many years in Italy, kind of the American dream for Italians. This is a sport that was born in America, more specifically born in Ohio many years ago, and is just has become a part of these different communities in Italy since, as you mentioned, the league first started in the early 80s. And so for them to have the opportunity to come to the States, play their championship game in the state where the sport was born, have the chance to see the Hall of Fame and kind of be a part of that atmosphere is very special, even more special around the July 4th festivities that will be happening in the city of Toledo as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this isn't just about the game. There's going to be an Italian-themed restaurant week. Some regional mayors are going to engage in a punt, pass, and kick competition. It's really kind of going all out.
It is, and it's also at a time period where people are going to want to still see a lot of football content. As you know, in America, there's always a desire for football content. You're starting to see now, I think, where the NBA in the 90s, you didn't have as many European players, and I think somebody mentioned to me, which was a staggering fact, that last year, something 3 or 4 out of the top 5 MVP vote getters were European born. And now you're starting to see this transition of kids growing up playing American football in Europe in general and ending up in the NFL down the road. In fact, there'll be a kid this year likely drafted in some of the early rounds of the NFL draft who grew up playing in Rome and then played 1 year of high school football in Florida and then played for the Pitt Panthers. So it's an exciting time for American football. It just makes sense that here's an opportunity to bring their championship game and play it in the States. And a lot of Americans who, like you said, didn't even know that American football exists in Italy, to be able to see the level at which these players can play and to see how far this game has come in Europe.
You mentioned the European players coming to the NBA. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, America was fielding soccer-style kickers, Jan Steenerud. And you mentioned before we started talking here, the first American football game played in Italy was actually on January 1st, 1945. And you mentioned there's a really interesting connection between Italy and Toledo that kind of ties to that event.
That's right. And they called that game the Spaghetti Bowl, which makes sense, right? This whole journey of American football to Europe goes back to World War II, where one of the iconic brands in Europe that really has staying power is the Jeep brand. And obviously the Jeep was very important and instrumental to liberating Europe after World War II. And so that was a part of bringing the sport, American football, because a lot of the soldiers, they had footballs with them. They played a game on January 1st. A lot of these guys who would have in normal times been playing a college football season and playing in a bowl game played that Spaghetti Bowl on January 1st, 1945 in Florence's soccer stadium, and then continued on, battling for the liberation of Europe. But the Jeep, as we were talking about, resonates particularly with the city of Toledo and Ohio, because every Jeep in the world is made in Toledo. And so it has very special roots here to Toledo, and so it also has a special place in the history of American football in Europe as well.
That's nice. And of course, for us in the APBA community, the tabletop sports gaming community, Ron Emsch has been running a great APBA baseball tournament in Toledo. It's a great city. You're going to be at the Glass Bowl. What does it take to bring this enterprise to America?
Let's say it goes back to the 1930s as it relates to Toledo and Ohio. The first 2 sister cities in the history of the world were Toledo, Spain, and Toledo, Ohio. And so this goes back, and it's funny how sometimes history comes full circle in different events. But in the 1930s, it was an isolationist period in the world, and people were in the throes of the Depression, and here was Toledo, Ohio, reaching out to Toledo, Spain, and saying, okay, we want to make friends, we want to connect, and now we're doing this again. And that the city of Toledo just recently became the sister city of Ferrara, Italy. And this idea was born of one of the citizens of Ferrara in Italy. Said it was the director of the Italian Bowl from I think 2012 to 2015, and he's one of the principal members of the Aquile Ferrara, one of the oldest American football teams in Europe. Had made some trips to Italy to Toledo as we were putting together the sister city relationship. And after one of those trips, he said, what do you think about doing a destination Italian Bowl for all these reasons? He drives a Jeep Gladiator. His name's Raffaello Pellegrini. He lives in Ferrara, drives a Jeep Gladiator. He got to see the production facility where these are made, was able to play golf at Inverness. He's a big golfer, which is one of the most historic golf courses in the United States. And he said, hey, we should organize this Italian Bowl, destination Italian Bowl, play it in Toledo, play it at the Glass Bowl because of this history related to the sport being born in Ohio, Canton, the Hall of Fame being here, and then of course the other synergies with Jeep and so forth. So that's how it started. And we hit a little bit of a snag with COVID, but again, coming out of COVID, we finalized this sister city relationship in what again was kind of an isolation period where people during COVID, they were locked down, and weren't venturing out. And here Toledo was again saying, we're going to make sister cities. We're going to come out of this and start engaging the world again.
Speaking of Canton, we're going to be actually holding an event there in August, kind of a tabletop game event there. Is Canton a partner in any of this, or who are some of your other partners to get this off the ground?
Part of the event week, Calvin Johnson, who's in the Hall of Fame, is going to be giving a tour to both of those teams through the Hall of Fame. And again, that'll be a special event kind of for everybody involved. These kids that, uniquely have grown up playing American football in Europe, to be able to have a tour of the Hall of Fame with a Hall of Famer is going to be special for them. And we have many, many great partners that we've been working with and spend, obviously, the city of Toledo to get involved the way that they have and be really a proponent of the sister city relationship between Toledo and Ferrara, but then also the game. Lucas County as well. University of Toledo, the Glass Bowl, where this game is going to be played. Everybody has been really enthusiastic and been a great help. BCSN Buckeye is going to broadcast the game. It's a local group here that is involved in the production of these events, the broadcast, and then it's also the cable provider for the region. They've jumped on board and have been a wonderful partner for this event as well. In fact, we'll be going to, I think the first game is in Milan. I think it's the Guelfi, who were the Italian Bowl champions from last year, against Scorpions Varese, which is, they have relegation in Italy. This is the first time that they've come up to the first division, and their opening game is going to be against the defending champions from the year before. So we'll be going there with a group from Buckeye BCSN to broadcast live that first game in March.
You use the word relegation. I instantly, my mind goes to Ted Lasso, which, you talked about the quality of American football in Italy, and there's a lot of American football around the world too. Japan has a league, a lot of teams around the world, but is the quality of football coming along really strongly there? And do you see some folks maybe kind of doing that reverse Ted Lasso, where you'd have some folks who are more football oriented kind of coming to the American football side of things?
I do. I see that happening. I think there's a significant opportunity with as much as the NFL is growing and even college football. So the NFL, American football in general, you may know these stats, Jeff, better than I do, but one of the sports that continues to grow through Europe, particularly, I think Super Bowl viewership grows annually throughout Europe at like 20 some odd %, which is surprising when a lot of other sports are declining annually on viewership, and the NFL continues to grow, which is a good sign that folks are going to continue to be playing football. And then you have stories like Habakkuk Baldonado, the kid I mentioned before, who looks like he's going to be drafted, grew up playing in Rome. And so I think you'll continue to see that happen. And much like basketball grew, I think you'll see that with American football. And then I think it's only going to happen more. I don't think it's a question of if, but when the NFL puts a franchise in Europe and London, probably. The other thing too is Italy just won the European Championship. They beat Sweden. I think it was in September, October this past fall, which is a big deal for Italian American football. So.
talking about these Italian title winners, Milan Seaman, Parma Panthers. What does the game in Italy very closely emulate what's happening in the NFL, or there are some subtle distinctions in terms of, I don't know, personnel packages, approaches to various situations on the field?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jeff. And one thing I've noticed, because you've had a lot of coaches who started their coaching career in Europe and have ended up coaching very successfully at in college and NFL level. And what I really believe is there are a lot of nuances that come out of the European American football game that makes these guys that start coaching in Europe think more outside the box and come back with new and different ideas that ultimately end up being successful, for them as coaches in the college and in the NFL world as well. Mike Leach, who recently passed away, I believe began his coaching career in Finland. That was the first place where he really had the opportunity to coach. Mark Helfrich, who was the head coach at Oregon and coached with the Bears for a while, began coaching for the Vienna Vikings in Europe. And then Joe Craddock, who's the offensive coordinator for Troy, was the offensive coordinator at Arkansas, and then was the quarterbacks coach at Clemson. Have played in Italy and was the offensive coordinator for the Parma Panthers at the time as well. So you see a lot of that transition, and I see a lot of creativity out of these folks when they bring their experience back to the States. One of the best quotes I think I heard was Art Briles asking what was the difference, because he won the title for the Guelphi last year. What's one of the biggest differences you notice between what have you learned? Have you learned anything from the Italian version of American football compared to where you were? And he said, I've learned one thing: practice is overrated. And I think what he meant was sometimes you can get caught, in the dogma of, oh, got to practice, do this, that, and everything. Well, it comes down to execution and still getting back to the basics of finding the mismatches and finding the creative ways to outthink your opponent in the chess game on the field. I found that very interesting and identified with that after playing in this league for so many years.
How long did you play in the league?
So I played it in Italy for 5 seasons, in Austria for 2. I played quarterbacks. A lot of times when they bring an American over, because you only have 2 or 3 Americans, you end up playing a few different positions. So I mainly played quarterback, but at times I played in the defensive back.
Harking back to single platoon football.
That's right. Yeah, very much so.
In terms of program, I mean, of course, if you're in America, you start Pee-wee, right? And there's a real strong progression funneling talent into the league. Is something like that in Italy or in other European nations as well that you've seen?
Yes, I've seen that. And, each one of these different countries has kind of different iterations on their youth program. It's club related, much like soccer. And so you grow up in a certain club and you stay in that club until you change directions. And, it's, I would say, much more in Italy anyway. It's a family type relationship with these club teams. You kind of grow up in this club and you're a part of this American football family. I'll give you an example of that. I was at a youth game a couple of years ago, actually before COVID, and I went to a youth game for my old team, the Lazio. Now they're the Lazio Ducks. They were Lazio Marines at the time. And you had this, I think it was an either under 15 game or under 17 game, something like that. And all the mothers of the Lazio team had gotten together and decided they were going to do their version of providing meals before and after the game. And everybody brought their homemade Italian lasagna and different things. You don't find this in youth football in the States. And so you have this version of it starting at these younger ages, and it's becoming more and more popular.
He's talking about carb loading in Italy, for goodness sake. Could you ever foresee a time when the NFL would allow a team to go out and play outside the NFL? Could you see something like that happening? And how would you project the outcome? Or what teams in Europe or in the Italian league specifically could kind of be a good match for today's NFL?
I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think what's more likely to happen sooner rather than later is one of these teams will end up moving to London. There'll be an NFL franchise there. And then I could see if that goes well, which I think everybody's pretty sure that will go well. And if they can work out the logistics of, getting teams back and forth to play these games, then a team will end up in France, a team will end up in Germany, and then ultimately Italy. So there may be a conference that is born, my speculation would be a conference that's born in Europe and called the European Conference. And then, that would be, they would all play each other and then have some games back and forth related to bye weeks to play stateside teams. I could see that happening. And I do believe that the NFL is kind of laying the groundwork for that first team to lead to more after that.
How will you gauge the success of the 42nd Italian Bowl in Toledo? And if it is, if it meets your expectations, could you see this game coming over here more often?
Yeah, and I think it's related right to your question. Let's gauge how this event goes and how well it's received and how the league enjoys it, how they like being over here. I imagine it's going to go well, and I do think it could lead to more and more exposure for them, because I think Americans are going to enjoy seeing this, American sport played here by Europeans and played well. And so I think it could lead to more events down the road. Another, kind of relating back to your question about seeing some of these teams compete against American teams, I also think it could lead to, so all these teams have national teams. Like we said, the Italian national team, I have the national team helmet behind me, from Italy. The Italian national team beat the Swedish national team for the European Championship. I could see that happening first down the road, where this, the Italian national team plays against, much like basketball was years ago, you maybe play against the amateur athletes to start, American teams to start doing some of that. And I could see more of that happening, where, instead of just thinking about, okay, NFL teams playing each other, it may end up being someday where there's like a World Cup of American football, right? Where there have been kind of iterations of that, but it hasn't taken hold. And I think someday you could see that, where, every maybe 4 years or something like that, there's a World Cup of American football. And I think that would be very well received wherever that is played in those different regions as the game continues to grow.
That's interesting. I'm totally excited about it. I know some folks in our community are, very soccer centric, so it would be an intriguing kind of amalgam of the concept, and I'd love to see it for sure. Obviously, we're in just about to start playoff season here in the U.S. and the NFL. What are your personal thoughts about how this is all going to play out?
As an NFL fan, I don't think you could be at all disappointed with how the season has played out and what's going to happen here in the playoffs. I think you've got some great teams. Now, I will say, I do think two of the hotter teams, the Packers and the Lions, both didn't make it in, which would have made it really interesting to see one of those two teams play against San Francisco. But there's just so much intrigue in these playoffs, with Brady being a complete underdog, coming in and taking a Tampa Bay team that's been all over the board. And then you have a lot of good teams in that NFC that are going to compete. On the other side, you've got Mahomes and Josh Allen and an AFC that is just loaded with talent. And so to see who comes through and ends up going to the championship games for each conference, and then the Super Bowl is going to be fun. I mean, I love wild card weekend, and then the divisional game. It's a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to those games.
Did you grow up a fan of any particular team?
I grew up in Michigan. So, I mean, how could you not be a Barry Sanders fan? So that's who growing up was on TV. It was Barry Sanders. So I don't even want to say you take it for granted, but you see the stuff he used to do. I'm sure you remember, you've seen the highlights of Barry. So it was fun, rooting for them, and they had some good years there, obviously. I am rooting for the Bucs, just being 43 myself and seeing Tom Brady at 45 doing what he does. Just the amount of respect, that I have for his ability to play so well is fun. So I'll root for him.
Tell me about the mechanics there. I mean, you're looking at his mechanics. I mean, it is amazing. And folks of my vintage, I'm 57, think back to somebody like George Blanda. It's a totally different thing, but I mean, at least longevity in the league. Certainly kickers. I mean, Morton Anderson, Gary Anderson played, over multiple decades, which I think is kind of an intriguing idea, playing over so many different evolutions of the game. But when you see Brady play or Rodgers play, I mean, Roethlisberger called it a day. But when you see these guys, I mean, do you see them kind of changing their game a bit, or in terms of playing to different physical strengths or their football IQ, or do you see them pretty close to where they were?
Brady's kind of that guy. The game has definitely changed, right? Because you have guys like Mahomes and Allen and guys that have changed, and even Cam Newton before, the guys that have changed how you play the quarterback position. But Brady, outside of maybe some minor tweaks to his throwing motion, he still plays the game the same way. And it's like he's authentic to his identity as a quarterback. I think the thing that's changed, but it was still such at a high level when he began his career, is his ability to process information so quickly in the heat of the moment in that game is something that it's unique. You just don't see that. And I mean, the ability to just, and his release is obviously quick, so that helps him. But the ability to process that information, he and Peyton Manning are two of the best that I've seen that can do that, because Brady's not going to beat you with his feet. He's not a Josh Allen type, thicker guy. So you have to know who you are and be authentic to who you are as a player, which he's definitely done, and then just fine tune and detail every bit of what you do as a player and make it better than your competitors. And that's what he's done. So I don't see him as evolving into something else. I see him as making every piece that he could control better, and that's why he's been able to stay so long.
And of course, they're 8 and 9. As a player yourself, how much can you really rely on chemistry and hot at the right time? How much of that kind of gels, and how much do you as a quarterback kind of help that along?
Yeah, so you have to, as a quarterback, and I learned this even more and more as you get into your career, and I think Tom Brady's a good example of that. There are multiple points in this season where the wheels could have come off for that Tampa Bay team, and they could have, slid their way out of the playoffs, and that didn't happen. And so when that doesn't happen, I mean, momentum's key, right? Coming into playoffs, and how hot can you get, and how well can you play, and some things have to fall your direction. But I think it bodes well for them that the wheels didn't fall off. They won some critical games when they had to, and they made it in to the playoffs. And so then you have to take that record and basically throw it out and say, okay, who's going to execute in elements, because now the NFL's get that beast where, in December and January, you can end up in some really difficult climates to play the game. That throws everything out the window as well. And how much have you come together as a team, and how much do you believe in each other to make plays and to win games? So I don't have a crystal ball on what's going to happen, because it's hard to tell, because they still kind of finished the season kind of shaky, but they're definitely in a better spot than they were 4 weeks ago.
And getting back to the 42nd Italian Bowl, who might we expect to see there? Who are some of the contenders, and how many games are they playing a season now?
It's a 10-game season there, and kind of the favorites that I would expect, that's before the playoffs. I think Parma Panthers, that I'm sure you've read the book Playing for Pizza, written by John Grisham. That's about that team and kind of a monumental upset that team beat the Bergamo Lions years ago. So I think Parma, because last year in my opinion, they had the best defense in that league. They had some issues on offense that I think they're going to end up sorting out this year. So I think they're clearly one of the favorites. The Guelphi, who won their first Italian Bowl last year, and what I was able to see the Italian Bowl live last year, and what I think was an absolute coaching masterpiece by Art Briles. They really, I think the Milano team on paper would have said is no doubt a better team, and he just put together an offensive and defensive game plan that was fantastic. So I think the Guelphi are up there. Lazio has some really talented folks coming. There are so many good teams this year that I wouldn't be surprised if Lazio came through. I wouldn't be surprised in the Bologna team. And then I'm hearing, but I haven't seen them, we'll get a good first look at them. The Varese Scorpions team is apparently very, very strong, they won the second division last year, and they've come up. And we'll get a very good indication on how good they are that opening game against the Guelphi.
Are any of those teams kind of dynastic, if you would say, kind of correlating to the American terminology?
Yeah, Parma is that team. I guess I would call Parma that, whatever you want to say, Steelers, Cowboys, Packers type history. So they're one of those teams. The other teams that I are part of that had dynasties, the Bergamo Lions, are still in the second division, so they haven't come back up to the first division. Same with the Ferrara from Aquile. They were a team that they founded in 1980, so one of the oldest in all of Europe, and they're not in the first division. So in the first division, I think you have to look at Parma as being that team with all the history, or a lot of the history.
When do the festivities actually start? The game is Saturday, July 1st.
The game is Saturday, July 1st. The Mayor's Cup, I believe, is the Sunday before that. And that's where a group of the mayors will have their punt, pass, and kick contest. The day of the game itself, there'll be some tailgating activities with different food vendors and experiences at the stadium. Immediately after the game, there will be it's called a Toledo night market with about 100 vendors of different goods and so forth. And that'll happen after the game from about 6 to 10 o'clock. So, and then immediately after that, there'll be a 4th of July fireworks show in downtown Toledo that the city of Toledo is putting on, and both teams will be there. Miriam Battistelli, who is a very prominent Italian soprano opera singer who sings at La Scala and at different venues throughout Europe, and is a rising star in the opera community, will be singing both the Italian national anthem and the American national anthem. And she's going to be giving, I believe, at least one performance, if not two, the week of the game as well, 2 private performances.
It'd be great if we could get some old members of Franco's Italian Army there as well. It's ItalianBowlUSA.com to read more about it and get tickets.
That's correct. Yep. And then also sign up to be included, and other for folks that are coming from Italy and from other places in the country. Within 45 minutes to an hour of Toledo is what many consider the best amusement park in the country, Cedar Point. And so we're on the site. I believe there'll be information sheets on who would like to sign up and be a part of those events, as well as Toledo Art Museum is considered one of the best in the Midwest, has a lot of Italian pieces in there. And then the zoo, the Toledo Zoo, was ranked actually #1 in the country, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and is a tremendous asset in the community as well.
42nd Italian Bowl coming to Toledo, Ohio. This is going to be awesome. I hope you folks can make it. I have tickets, so we're trying to get out there, and best of success, Nick. I had one more little request, if I may. Speaking of Italy, one of the great tabletop game designers, a gentleman by the name of Roberto Chiavini, lives in Firenze. I wondered if, since you showed me an interview you gave to some folks over in Italy, and you speak great Italian, I wondered if you might, on behalf of the gaming community in the U.S., give Roberto a nice shout out and thank him for all his great work.
Certo, non proverò. Grazie tantissimo Roberto per tutti i giochi da tavoli che hai creato. Io sono uno che gioco un sacco di questi giochi a tavolo, io anche la mia moglie che è italiana, e noi giochiamo sempre i giochi a tavoli. Grazie tantissimo da cuore, e speriamo di vederti anche te a Toledo per questa partita.
Thank you so much, Nick. Be well. Thank you so much for this information. Again, best of success for the 42nd Italian Bowl in Toledo.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. I hope to meet you in person.